it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. We are kicking off the new year with a new series. We love doing these for you each month. As you know, we love to really embrace every single month of the year, not just the seasons, and really just enjoy what each of those months offers. In January, here we're kicking off with our February kit. And the reason we do that in advance is that way, if you are purchasing our limited amount of kits we have available, you can get that in the mail, get that made, hopefully in the month of January, to be able to display for February. The reason that I came up with the pint-sized table runner series, which is what we're calling this, you know we love our table runners here at Shabby Fabrics. I really enjoy having those on my table, especially when I'm going to be having a special dinner and having guests to the house. But the reason I decided to make a smaller kind of runner, pint size, is because a lot of us are living in smaller spaces now, or maybe you're just downsizing, or maybe you've got that really special table where a longer table runner is just overwhelming. It's too big. And so we hope you enjoy the pint-sized table runner series. We put a lot of energy into writing a really fantastic full color pattern that for a limited time will be available for you to download for free. So you can do that if you're watching on YouTube. There should be a link in the description box. You'll be able to click that, and that'll actually jump you over to the Shabby Fabrics website where you'll be able to download that again for a limited time for free. And then later on, this will become a paid pattern where you'll be able to purchase that on its own. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, be sure to do that. So much more coming your way. You're going to be getting a new pint-sized table runner every single month of the year of 2022. My goal here will be, of course, to show you some tips and techniques to make the blocks. They'll be changing every single month. So you'll be expecting to have about a 6-inch block each time with a really pretty scallop separating our piece blocks from our applique. And then we'll be doing just a little bit of applique. So if you're normally just doing piecing, this will be a nice introduction for you. So you'll be doing a little bit of applique. In our kits, we have taken the steps to pre-fuse and laser cut those shapes for you so that when you receive them, they're already cut out. Isn't that amazing? And you'll just be literally peeling the paper off the back, and you'll be able to iron that down. And I love that you can just now jump right into the fun. And we've put together a little small 3-piece thread set for you. That's the colors that you'll need to be stitching down: the red, the pink, and the green. So that's what you can expect for our program. I'll be going much more in depth today than I potentially will in future videos, because I'm going to be talking about the applique portion, how you'll be managing that. But in future months, I'll be really dialing in on the piece spots. That's where we'll be spending the majority of our time. I'll just talk about the tools as I use them versus introducing them now. One thing I want to call your attention to, this is Faultless Magic. It's basically sizing. I'm not stuck on this brand. Maybe you have a favorite brand. The idea is that anytime we're going to be doing some more intricate piecing, adding some sizing, and that's different than starch, by the way. It's not as heavy as starch. Starch can be very flaky, a little messy to work with sometimes. But with sizing, it adds a nice kind of almost a bulk, sturdiness to that just helps my cuts be cleaner, more accurate, and I have less stretch on the bias. So it's a lot of good things. Very readily available kind of in that laundry aisle where you might find laundry soap, fabric softener. Look for that. I know I've seen it in Walmart's, Target's, really, and at grocery stores, readily available. So I just wanted to mention that. Download is available, as I said, for a limited time. Be sure to grab that. It is in full color. So if you have that option on your printer, be sure to grab that. I want to mention, if you are going to be grabbing one of our limited kits, that will include the backing fabric as well, and you will get that pattern in your kit. No need to download anything. In addition to the pattern, you'll need some diagrams. If you're going to be using the free download, that'll be in 2 pages. That way it'll fit on your home printer. If you're going to be getting our kit, We've put that on a larger piece of paper for you. That'll again be included in your kit. So let me put that we'll probably use that one today. It's a little bit easier. If you're going to be downloading this, maybe using your fabrics from home, you'll just line up those bullseyes, kind of maybe a light box, which you'll be using a little bit later, will help you line everything up and go ahead and tape those two pieces together. And that will be what you'll be using for your layout diagram, or what we call an assembly diagram. So more of that to come. I want to dive into some piecing. We'll talk about maybe some traditional techniques that you may have learned, probably the way I learned, and then new products have come on the market that I think are really fun to use, and they have increased my accuracy exponentially. And that's why I wanted to bring those to you and offer those to you as a potential option. So let's just start off with our pattern's going to give you your required materials and all of your cuts. Some people find it helpful to actually label those fabrics. We do a little bit further on in the pattern, label those A, B, C, and D. Sometimes people find that helpful, that once they cut out those pieces, they put a little sticky note on there that says A or B or C, and it makes it a little bit easier later on when you're doing your piecing and your assembly. So just something else to think about, maybe if you're brand new to quilting. And if you are, welcome. There's so much coming your way in the wonderful world of quilting, or maybe you're experienced and you're just enjoying maybe a smaller project. No doubt you have some more complex projects you are working on. So after you get your fabrics sized, ironed, and cut precisely, grab a fresh blade. By the way, if you've got a dull blade, you're going to have difficulty having the accurate piecing. Grab a blade. I'm terrible sometimes about remembering to change my blades before I start cutting my fabric. And so just do that up front. Once everything is cut out, we're going to take you to the very top of page 2, where our first step really is just making a simple 4-patch. And we're going to press our seams open. I want to call your attention to the arrows. We've got those in various places of the pattern. These are what we have found as being the best way to help our block lie flat, so that when we're bringing that into the table runner, we don't kind of have those peaks that can happen when you have too many of the seams turning in the same direction, and they create a lot of bulk and kind of imbalance. So take note of those pressing recommendations. Of course, you can do whatever you want, but this is what we went ahead and did with our block. So the first thing we did, once we cut out our 2-inch squares for our 4-patch, is we just sewed those together and pressed the seams open. So I just want to I'll be showing you the back of these blocks as well, so you're able to see those. So that's what we're representing here. And our first one, and those arrows are just showing you that that seam is going this way, and that's what's pressing open. So if you're new to quilting, that's what we're trying to represent, that direction of that seam is going this way and that one's coming that way. And we've done the same for both. So I'm just going to set that aside for now. We're going to move into making what's called a flying geese unit. That's what this unit is right here. We're going to start off with our X block. Obviously, this is X's and O's, what we were trying to represent for Valentine's. And that's when I designed this one. That was the idea, kind of just a fun representation. Obviously, it's a heart instead of an O, but you get the idea. So we have a really cool technique how to make flying geese 4 at a time. And so I'm going to show you that technique using something called the Creative Grid Flying Geese tool. Now, if you don't want to buy that, that's okay. I'm going to give you an option to still be able to use kind of the technique and use your favorite ruler to square up. But this is definitely a tool that is my absolute go-to. If I'm going to make a flying geese block, I'm grabbing for that ruler. That's my new normal on making flying geese blocks. So starting off with our instructions and starting off with our ruler, in fact, let's just grab that, and I'm going to try to zero in on that. Maybe we can get that from the overhead. What the Ultimate Flying Geese tool will offer you, again, you don't need to be using this tool. I'm going to talk you through this. We can still use these measurements, be able to make our flying geese units, but you need to use a different ruler to square up, which won't be quite as accurate or convenient, but you could get the job done. Again, this is worth its weight in gold. But what the Flying Geese tool does for you is if you want to make Flying Geese units as small as a half an inch by 1, can you imagine how tiny? Maybe you're doing miniature quilts, all the way up to Flying Geese units that are 4 by 8. This tool gives you the guidance to do that. How you read this on the left side, and note that those are finished sizes, not unfinished sizes, but the finished size once your block is complete. So as we look at this here, this is going to finish at 1.5 by 3. These are 6-inch blocks finished. So today we know that we want to have a 1.5 by 3-inch finished block. So what that's telling us is we will cut one 4 3/4 inch square of this main fabric right here. And we're going to need to be doing that twice. So you, in your kit, you would need to be cutting this twice, but of course I'll just demonstrate that once. And then you will need to cut 4 of the 2 3/4 inch squares. And that's what we have here. So that's your first step, is to understand, how do I read this on the left? What do I need to cut out in order to make the Flying Geese units for the size that I need? So let me put that up there for just a moment. The way that we use our Ultimate Flying Geese, and we've shown this here right up there, is you'll simply place one of those squares, and we've just drawn a line. I grabbed a smaller ruler and my friction pen, and you just simply draw a line corner to corner. That's all you need to do. And you'll do that on the back of all 4 of those 2 3/4 inch squares. We'll simply place them in those corners, and notice how those lines are now continuous. This is where your patchwork pins come into place. You don't want anything to move. I'm going to be sewing with an Aurifil. If you are, maybe new to quilting, while there's a beautiful array of thread on the market, when it comes to piecing, you're really only ever going to need a neutral set. This has a white, a gray, and a black in it. That's all you're really ever going to need when you're doing piecing. Now, later on, when you're doing applique and you want to stitch everything down, that's when the fun colors come into play. And I encourage you to fill your sewing room with a rainbow of thread, because it's lovely, it's fun, it's inspiring, all the great, all those things. And of course, it's nice when your thread matches your fabric. Once you have this like this, and I've got the white from the Carrera set inside my machine, what our next task is, and I'm going to point this out in the pattern. See how this is where we are right here. Those dashed lines represent stitching. We're now going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from our drawn line on both sides. That's going to lead us into our next step. I'm just going to put one more pin probably right in here. Now, I tend to find that if the right side of my presser foot is riding right along this line is ideal. So let's head over to that sewing machine. I'll try to point that out when I'm talking about. You may or may not be able to see it. I tend to bias myself to the line versus, you're trying to find a true 1/4 from the line, but the right side of my presser foot is kind of right on that line. So let's just get started. Most machines you can simply pull out just like that and kind of start again. You don't really even need to cut your thread. So let's get that iron heating up real quick, and we will go on to our next step. Full hot, of course. And in our instructions, they're letting us know, I'm just going to grab, I can grab for probably this ruler will fit. And we'll cut on that I should have grabbed that 6.5 by 12.5. That's probably why I brought that out on the set, right? I knew this one was a little bit too short. We just have you press to the pink. And I know that looks a little weird, right? That looks strange at this point. But this is how we do it. Once we have that, make sure that's back in its cradle heating. That's the Panasonic iron. You know, I used to use a corded iron on set, and sometimes as I would drag the iron, the cord would knock things off my table. I have found the convenience of this Panasonic to be, you know, maybe you're in limited space, maybe you too, you know, knock stuff over with the cord. So if you're looking for a great kind of cordless iron, it does need to be in the cradle when it's heating, but you know, not a problem. And it has a steam function. There's a steam kind of reservoir in there. So if you want to be steaming something, you'll have that available. Sometimes I forget to mention this iron. It's my go-to, and I forget to tell you why it's my go-to. Okay, so we're here, right? This is what it looks like right now. Remember, we had 4 of those, and so far we've only used 2 of those 2 3/4 inch squares. Now comes in the next one in this corner. Notice that line is going right through that V right there. That's a great visual confirmation that let me put that pin aside. That's one of the Clover fine. I'm now working with my extra fine pins, and I've got my magnetic pin holder I'm using today. And the same. And again, just as we're showing, we will go so a 1/4 inch away from that. And let me go do that. You know, it's nothing, no big surprise there. Let me get that sewn. When I come back, I'll cut them apart with you. And then we're going to show you how we start to use the Flying Geese tool, because what we've done is created an oversized Flying Geese block that allows us to trim it up and have it absolutely perfect going into our block. Let me go get that sewn, 1/4 inch on either side on both of those. When I come back, we'll continue making our 4 Flying Geese blocks. Okay, so we have those units, and now we're ready to cut those apart. I cannot wait to show you how to use this tool. It's amazing. I love Flying Geese. You know, in North Idaho, we have geese. Oh, we have a lot of geese. And it's kind of just a celebration of the beauty of the Pacific Northwest to make a Flying Geese block quilt. And so I really have learned to rely on this wonderful tool to have really nice Flying Geese blocks. Okay, just like before, press to the outside. And now we're ready to use the incredible ingenuity of this product. And I'm going to make a little bit of space because we're going to use the spinning mat. Notice it's here. I use my spinning mat. Oh my gosh, I use my spinning mat. Anytime I'm squaring up a block, it is on my spinning mat. My ruler's on top because now I don't have to move the fabric. I can square up, rotate, square up. It has led to so much more accuracy for me for my blocks coming out true. I mean, I don't know if I ever had a true 12-inch block maybe before that time. But I am finding now my blocks are truly coming, 12.5 unfinished, 12-inch finished. So I'm very happy about that. So getting back to our tool, I'm going to flip this over so we can see that again. Remember, we're working with letter C. I want to call your attention to notice how it says trim 1 here. And over on this side, it says trim 2. Make sure you're starting off with your trim 1. And remember how over here, the 1.5 by 3 is identified as kind of letter C. They just named it that. That means when you go to trim number 1, you're also looking for letter C. And similarly, when you go to trim 2, letter C. Whatever letter you're doing for the size of block, flying geese block, you're going to stay with that letter the whole time, of course. So now that you understand that aspect of it, we will put our flying geese unit here. Remember, we're oversizing this. Let me show you this real quick, what that's going to look like with the sight picture of using the flying geese tool. And if you're like, you know what, I've got just a room full of rulers and I don't want to buy another tool. I get that. I respect that. I will show you how to trim that up, maybe with a different ruler. The whole goal really is, what are we trying to get accomplished? We're trying to get accomplished that in the end of this thing, that this block finish will be 1.5 by 3. That means we need to trim our block to a 1/2 inch bigger on the length and width by 2 by 3.5 is what that's going to need to be going into the project. So as we measure this here, our one that's been trimmed up, it's 2 by 3.5. That's the goal. However you want to get there, just remember from that point above, you need only 1/4 inch. So you can see if I was using my tool, and I would cut here and here. If you want to be using a different tool, that's fine. A 3.5 by 6.5 inch tool is also phenomenal, considering it has this kind of delta here. You see that right there? Now this is going to require a little more effort to square up. You're only going to be able to square up one side at a time, but this could work. But let's focus on this tool and all that it does for us. And you'll see that we'll be able to trim up in just 2 kind of movements, so to speak, where I'm going to be able to trim up here and here, and then I'll be able to rotate and then trim up the others. So we've got our everything lined up. So we go here. We're not going to move anything, and we'll trim up. Just keep rotating the mat in the direction, one more rotation, because it puts our trim to in our optimal spot. You see that? So I'm going to slide down to C, and look how that just clicks in. Hopefully my head's out of the way there. See these dashed lines in my C? Watch me kind of drop that down right into that slot. You have vertical, horizontal, and that V guidance to know that now when you make this cut, give it one more rotation, here, your block now measures a perfect 3.5 by 2. I'm not that good, guys. I've been doing this a long time, and I just cannot match the accuracy of what oversizing flying geese blocks does with this tool and trimming them up. I can't rival that. And we all know, if you've done any piecing at all, the key is that everything is really coming out the size that it should, because it's going to be sewn to its neighboring fabric, right? I can't have these being a different size and expect the block to come out. It just won't. It's going to be those early blocks I made when I was excited about quilting, but really had no clue how to do it. And that's why we do our tutorials. We're hoping that we're giving you some fun skills, achievable skills, doable skills, so that you can come out with really accurate blocks and have fun doing that. So you just repeat those steps. Notice how it only took one of the squares of this polka dot, 4 of those 2 3/4 inch, and you will have 4 flying geese blocks. It's an incredible use and economical use of fabric. Once you have those all squared up and ready to go, now let's just jump back into our pattern. I'm kind of all over in my pattern. I am totally excited to bring you guys this tutorial. I love teaching people how to sew. I love teaching them how to use tools and techniques. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, as I said, and let a friend know as well how fun to maybe be making these, whether you're using our kit or maybe your own fabrics. We just want you to sew and have fun. That's what we're after here. Get your blocks ready to go, and you'll just start to lay everything out. Now I did the bottom row so that we would have something ready to go. Looks like I need to square up one more, which I will do real fast. And you've got these squares in the corner. These are, again, 2 inch squares. So I need to square up one more. Let me do that real quick. And we'll just maybe fast forward through that. And maybe you want kind of a refresher of how I squared that up. Okay, all squared up. Here we are. So back to this place. Notice how we again have some pressing directions for you. So we will, your preference. We just made a point of having the polka dots kind of be opposite. So that's one thing when you get ready to lay your blocks out. Obviously, we've only done the pink block, but when you do get ready to lay them out, just kind of make sure, you've got that same juxtaposition so everything is coming out as expected. So we'll lay out all of our flying geese units. Just like that. Some squares in the corner. And it looks like we put our bottom row together already just to kind of demonstrate to you what we did here. So as you kind of look at this, you can see, and again, we've got some pressing directions, some recommendations here. We'll be right side together, right side together. So your 1/4 inch seam allowance, pressing away, and that makes sense, right? You've got seams here. You're going to press away to your kind of plain, simple 2-inch squares out here. Now with this one, I'm going to sew aside with you on this one. We're right here. I definitely recommend that this is the part that's up top because you see that point right there? That's where your needle must pass. It's a visual checkpoint for you. We have a seam open on that side. This is why everything needs to be the same size. That's pressed open, and this is pressed this way. That point right there is what needs to be lined up with this. But if we pin in the beginning, pin in the end, and make sure that needle passes that point, we should achieve it. Let's go sew that together. I want you to see this part. So here, and our instructions mention for that center portion, arrange units as shown, sew together in rows, and press away from my flying geese. So since this is my flying geese, I'm going to press away toward my center. I'll set my seam, kind of warm that up. And there's a lot of bulk here. I recognize that. This is one of the reasons that we did press the center seam open, is to try to distribute the bulk evenly. There is a lot going on there. So you can see how nice that looks. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve, is that V. We have our nice points. Of course, you would sew that on the other side. Now I've done that part ahead of time to kind of just move us along. And then for our rows that are on kind of our top and our bottom, again, I've got those two done. Let's look at that. You can see how with the middle row pressing toward the middle, the top and bottom rows pressing to the outside, we have interlocking seams. So I want to definitely show that to you so you can see that you're not going to just pin left to right. We now know we have some beautiful interlocking seams, and that's where we're going to pin first. Let me just trim this away so it's less for you to kind of have to look through. There we go. So we'll, right there, you can hopefully see that from above. If you're an experienced quilter, you know exactly what's going on here. Maybe if you're new, this is how we are successful. We look for those areas. We try to always have opposite interlocking seams. And then we'll put a pin on this side. Some people pin out here. Why I pin on this side is I can leave that pin in the whole time. If I had pins in out here, as I sew along, I have to remove them before I get there. I have to remove them. And I don't recommend sewing over pins. I know some people do. I have had a pretty bad experience with that. Damaged my machine, broke a needle. It was bad. Kind of brought my project to a grinding halt because now I've got a tip of a needle inside my machine. It went right down in the feed dogs. And now you better stop sewing, right? That's what I've learned. Pin here. Again, my other interlocking seam. Oh, we got a bent pin on that one. Let's get rid of that. If you've got bent pins, you know what? Just send those downstream. And we'll pin in that corner. And of course, here, we definitely want to pin there. Let's go sew that together. I want you to see how good pinning works. And we got to iron to full hot. Let's see what our instructions are telling us. Looks like they are recommending we press this downward. Boy, that is a lot of bulk. Let's see here. Downward would be here. Look how nice our points are. I love that. That's what pinning, I used to think, oh, pinning, it's too much work. Well, I ended up getting really good at seam ripping. So I think you can either take the time up front or take the time later, and it's more frustrating. I'd rather pin and sew once than seam rip, etc. So same thing, of course. You're pinning and then sewing that together, and you will have your X block. So that's what is the ingredients to making our X block. I'm going to clean up just a little bit here, get things ready to go. We'll work on our heart block. Some of the things will be maybe some a little bit similar. We're going to use some different techniques. I wanted to be able to show you some other options on that. And I'll be right back, and we'll move right on to our page 3 of our instructions, and we're making our heart block. We're back now. We're going to be making our heart block, and really fun, slightly different techniques on this one. So unlike the X block, where you had 4 flying geese units that were all the same, and that's why it was just perfect really to be cutting the one larger of the polka dot, and then those 4 of the smaller squares to make 4 flying geese units, all the same per X block. And of course you did that for the second one. Here, this is the block right here where the field is the white polka dot and those points are the red. And you're only going to need 2 of those. So sometimes maybe you even only want 1 flying geese unit. So I'm going to give you an option where maybe you don't want to make 4. So in our instructions, we'll just dive into our pattern. This is where we're really now focusing on page 3. This is the flying geese unit we're going to focus on right here. This is also a flying geese unit, but notice it's the inverse. The main field is the red with that, but we're going to focus on this one right here first. So our instructions have you cut piece B, looking at our pattern, to 2 by 3.5. If you do that, again, I recommend sizing, you'll have nothing to square up in the end. As long as you're sewing and cutting, obviously cutting and sewing precisely, that's not a problem. Let me just show you that initially, and then I'm going to give you an option that'll allow you to make that a little bit bigger, and we can use, again, our flying geese tool to still square that up, even though we're only going to be making one of those units for this particular block and making it a second time for our second heart. Per our instructions, our square A's are 2 inches. I have 2 of those. And you'll draw a line from corner to corner. Again, grab your favorite straight edge or ruler, and I love to grab my friction pen. And you'll be placing those corner to corner, sewing on that. And what's different about this one that I want to point out to you is we have pressed our seams open. Normally when I sew on the line, I sew and flip and I press all seams to the outside. In fact, let me go sew this with you. I just want to trim this up and press that with you so you see what I'm talking about. So I've just got the one side here. Let's just go sew on the line. Before you trim, I like to just take a quick check. I kind of sometimes just fold that over and say, you know, is that where it should be? Am I short? This is what I'm looking for. If that looks like that, that means I sewed on this side of the line. If I see the fabric extending beyond my rectangle, that means I sewed on that side of the line. If it's flush and it appears as though that corner was never there, that's a good one. With that, now we'll go use our 1/4 inch or dashed line on our smaller ruler. Let's just trim this away. As I was saying, normally I am always just pressing away. We've discovered on this particular block, just because of the confluence of a lot of pieces coming together, this was going to help our block lie a little bit flatter by pressing the seam open. And you need to do that step now before you sew on the other A square on the other corner. Otherwise, that seam will be trapped. So you want to make sure you give that a good press. We'll repeat that with the other side. Heck, we're at this far. Let's just go sew that together. I might use a starter strip on this one. If you ever have a problem with the points, when you're kind of starting at a point, diving into the feed dogs, sometimes we have a starter strip that we just kind of get sewing with and then come right onto the fabric. I'm going to trim that starter strip away. We can use that again. Again, let's check it. Are we happy? I am happy with what I'm seeing. Let's trim away. And again, we're going to press that. Let's warm up that seam. It'll be more likely to do what we want it to do with a nice warm seam. And we'll let that sit there for just a bit there and get that just as flat as we can make it. As you remember, with our Flying Geese units, one of the things we enjoyed, though, was being able to oversize them and trim them up. That's my favorite technique, hands down. The measurements in this pattern are not, especially on this part, on the heart, on these two Flying Geese units, are not using the measurements on the Flying Geese tool because you don't need to make 4. The point being, those measurements are going to give you the exact size you need, and this should measure now 2 3.5 inches. And it did. I'm also an experienced quilter. Maybe you're new and maybe you're like, I really like that squaring up technique. Can I still do that even on my heart block for just 2 of those, one for here and one for here? And the answer is yes. How do I do that? Easy. All you do, let's go back to letter B here, which had us cut 2 by 3.5. Well, your option now is to simply upsize. So your B, there's enough fabric in your kit. Don't get too crazy. You can upsize that. Let's say we're going to upsize that by 1/2 inch in both directions. Instead of cutting a 2 by 3.5, let's say that now we're going to cut a 2.5 by 4. So that's what we've done here. If you upsize your rectangle, you need to upsize your squares to match right, just like before. These are 2.5. So we will follow the same steps of drawing the line. We could follow the same steps of drawing the line, but I'm going to give you yet another option. You saw the exercise of what that takes. You draw the line, you sew on the line, you have to come back, you have to confirm, does that look good? And then you trim, and then you press. New tool, new option. Love this tool. This is called a corner clipper. Let's go back to the same, back up here. The difference is we're just doing upsize fabric that's going to allow us to oversize our block and be able to use our Flying Geese tool to trim up still, or maybe your favorite ruler. Instead of, well, let me just draw the line. This is what you normally would do. You go sew on that line. Creative Grid, once again, has come up with a tool. Remember, this is the part that ultimately is going to be cut away. I'm just going to draw a squiggly line. That's going to be, quote, waste, right? Well, they came up with a really cool tool that's going to eliminate the need to draw the line and trim up later. You do it all in one step. How does that thing work? So looking at this here, if I know this is the part that I want to trim away, I'm going to turn this around. Look at this line on this tool. Notice that says 2.5. Remember I told you I cut 2.5-inch squares. This now replaces the need for you to draw that line. I'm going to cut away now, and I'm simply going to go to the machine and sew. That's it. It's fantastic. Let's go do that. Just like before, we will press open. Hey, maybe you're just going to watch this video. Maybe you're going to make flying geese blocks. Go ahead and press to the outside. If you don't have a reason to be pressing your seams open this way, go ahead and press to the outside. So again, this is just another option for you if that's confusing, and it can be. When I first started using the corner clipper, I had a hard time orienting my mind for it, especially that first cut. This cut's actually more natural. Show you what I'm talking about. That's this one right here. We can visualize, and we know that we would normally draw the line, and this side is away. It's easier for us to visualize it when it's in this orientation. See that? 2.5. That's the drawn line. This makes this thing go away. You're not drawing that anymore if you choose this. If you are brand new to quilting, I would not recommend this for you. I would recommend to draw the line, sew on the line, do those confirmation checks I did. If you're experienced and you enjoy using tools and new ways to get things accomplished, this is what I'd encourage you to give it a shot. I'm going to go ahead and trim this away. I will put a pin in. Notice I have no drawn line. I don't need a drawn line. This is my edge to sew 1/4 inch. Again, let's press our seam open. I definitely appreciate that Creative Grid, when making their tool, that Flying Geese, recognize that sometimes you want to go with your favorite technique. Maybe you don't want to cut that bigger single 1-inch square, or maybe you don't have the fabric to do that. Maybe you're doing something really scrappy with smaller pieces. This gives you the option of oversizing, and now I just simply go in and say, all right, what size do I need this to be? I need this to be a 1.5 by 3 finished. Okay, I'm using C. We did that before with our X block, our pink X block. And so now we're going to follow our same steps. I've got trim 1 up. I'm in my V. And make 1 cut. 2 cuts. Remember, give it 1 more rotation. We drop down trim 2 into our our saddle here. We're looking for C, sliding right into that slot. We've got vertical, horizontal, our V. Oh, I bumped that with my scissors. This thing takes some space. That's okay. We'll get relined up. And now I have a perfect 2 by 3.5. So this one was made kind of organically, old school, right? Making sure everything was cut exactly to, there's no squaring up. There is no chance to be off, or you can upsize. And notice they're the same. In the end, they're the same, but there's no question that squaring up is the more accurate way to go. So far, where we are in our block, I'll kind of put this off to the side. We have our top portion. We made our 4 patch before, pressing our seams open. And as far as the bottom portion of our center, it's the same. It's the exact same, just the inverse. You can cut that exactly per the fabric requirements or the cuts, of B and A, or upsize and trim, whatever you want to do. So that completes that portion. What we did for our sides to reduce the seam is I thought it would be a lot of fun to just start off with a rectangle and do something called Snowball the Corners. So again, let's refer to our pattern, and that's the piece E that's having us cut our 2 for each of the heart blocks for a total of 4, since you're making both of those rectangles to 2 by 5. And then we'll be coming back with some C squares that are cut to 2 by 2. So this is, if we look at this right here, this is probably looking a little familiar to you, right? It's very much like this. It's the same concept. You can either put this here, sew on the line, confirm, sew and flip just like that, or you could be using your corner clipper. We could say, I don't want to draw lines anymore. I don't want to trim away later. I want to do that step now. Go with whatever you're comfortable doing. In fact, I'll do one of each, and we'll get that accomplished. And then I've already got one of our sides done. And notice that they're not reversible. Like that one is specifically made for the right side. But let's start off with this one together, and that's what's shown here. So we have that rectangle, like I mentioned, and it's sew and flip. So sew on that and simply flip to the outside. And let's, as I said, let's do one sewing on the line, the other one with the corner clipper. I think that's fun to show you kind of what that will look like. So that one's here. And this one, I'm going to get rid of that drawn line. I just want to introduce these options to you. Here's what I recommend. If you're going to do sew and flip, do sew and flip. If you're going to do corner clipper, do corner clipper, but maybe not a mix and match. But I'm going to just mix and match to demonstrate to you how you're going to get to the same goal with a little bit of a different steps, less steps. But you need to be confident in that 1/4 inch seam here. Here, you have to find the 1/4 inch seam. Here, you're sewing on the drawn line. So again, beginner, do this. Experience, try that, just for fun. All right. Okay, on this one, we got to get that 1/4 inch right there. And let's look here. I believe those were also pressed open. Yes, they were. And again, the goal being to reduce bulk. So nothing to trim away over on this side where we chose the corner clipper. Let's move that for the moment here. This one, let's double check it. Make sure we like what we're seeing. We're like, yep, I think we did a good job on that. We'll come back. We'll do that extra step that this technique does take. But it is a bit of a safety net. So if you are much more comfortable with that, keep doing it. Do whatever works for you. I've definitely discovered, but you know what? Don't get stuck in a rut. I learn from so many people. I'm still learning, and I hope I will always keep that willingness to learn my whole life, because people have good ideas and I want to hear what they have to say. and give it a try. Sometimes I've tried techniques, I'm like, I think I'm going to stick with the way I've been doing it. It's more comfortable for me. But sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, that's a much better way to do that. That's my new go-to. Okay, same result, different approach. So that's here, and then we'll simply sew our C square on the bottom. Let's just go sew that real quick, 1/4 inch seam. And you'll notice the pressing arrows on this are definitely pressing toward that C. So we'll just flip that like that. And now you have all of the elements that you need to put that heart block together. So let's just lay that out real quick. Make sure everything is where it should be. Have that at the top, middle, and bottom, and here. And, you know, we definitely recommend that center row going together. And you've got that V right there. That's your 1/4 inch seam. Here, you could even flip that over if you wanted to. I probably would sew that on the back side so I can keep my eye on those seams. Or you pin well on this side and you sew here. And of course, just be pressing now toward that center 4 patch as indicated with the white arrows here. I know it's already been a long video, so I don't want to make you watch me sew anymore. I want to be able to, oh, we got those on the wrong side. Move on to the applique portion. Once that's done, you're just going to be sewing your sides on and your blocks are going to be complete. Obviously, making 2 of those. Now, you would just be placing your blocks. And again, if you want to make sure that your polka dots are opposite, you can see because this block is square, you can turn it any way you want. If you are wanting to have those polka dots opposite, and again, your kind of little ditzy print opposite, you'll just want to be mindful of the way that you lay, in particular, the X blocks in juxtaposition and sew this together. Probably pressing those seams open. That's a lot of seams coming together, and pressing to one side or the other doesn't make sense to me. I press this together at seams open. And now this unit should measure 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. That's what you'll have here. The applique ends, so much fun. Again, our kit has everything pre-fused and laser cut for you. This is really what your applique ends are going to look like. You'll want to make sure that you are cutting your backgrounds precisely to the 5.5 by 12.5. And don't oversize those. Your applique shapes are going to be pre-fused and laser cut. And things like your scallop and the bottoms of your stems, notice how those extend fully into the seam allowance. And I like that. I like that I don't have to worry about those being tucked down and now securing the edge. You don't have to stitch that down. Those will be caught inside our seam allowance. So how fun is that? In fact, we can just iron that one down right now. Just like that. Now, we've been piecing, right? We've had our iron on the hottest setting that we can have it on. One thing I need you to know with heat and bond or any fusible applique product, it does not do well with full heat at all. It prefers a more medium heat. You can definitely scorch the any fusible product if you're using it on too hot of a setting. Once you have this where you want it to be, go ahead and just run your iron across that. Now for the applique for the February pint size, it's quite simple. You can certainly use, and I'd recommend if you're going to be joining us for this program, it'd be really fun to have you grab your wafer one light box and your smaller Applifuse mat, because sometimes the applique won't be quite as simple. There's a lot of fun things coming your way. But how we use our light box, if maybe you've never used one before, and I'll just get that out of the way. The wafer light boxes come in size 1, 2, 3. For this program, this size will do you well for the whole time. If you love applique, you love layering applique, in conjunction with an applique pressing mat, you might want to consider the larger size of the wafer, maybe the size 2. The 3 is really big. Unless you have a reason to be using the really large one, it's almost too big sometimes. I like larger projects, so I do grab for that at times. These things in conjunction with that applique assembly diagram. In your kit, this will be one large piece. If you're going to be downloading that and maybe using your own fabric, again, you'll have the 2 sheets. You're going to want to line those up. This is going to be our target. What this is doing for us, I'm going to turn my light box on. This light box can get brighter than what you're seeing and dimmer by simply holding the button down. It'll get brighter or dimmer as you desire. I love that part about that. I have mine dialed down a little bit because it tends to get blown out with the overhead camera. This shape here is the size of our background. That is the size of this right here. We made that so that you can put your fabric there, and I think I might have shrunk my fabric just a touch. I think I actually undercut my background. I can see that. But what this is doing for us, let me turn that off so it's easier for you to see. Let's look at our assembly diagram. You can expect this every month coming from us, either as a free download or if you're going to be getting the kits, that will be included. Well, I've got threads all over me. I guess I'm a quilter, right? That's how you know. I'm always telling people at work, okay, like before I go to leave work and I'm going to go to the grocery store, please tell me if I have a threads everywhere. But looking at our diagrams, you can see that pieces are numbered. What that's letting you know is the first piece with the lowest number is going to go down first. So let's look at that. Piece 1, piece 2, and I can see we kind of just went for it with video prep, but you could see that piece was supposed to tuck under our stem, and number 2 was supposed to tuck under, and our stem was going to be going on top. As you can see, it looks like we didn't maybe have our assembly diagram completely done before we put our applique unit together. It's still cute. Whatever you want to do. However, in some months coming up, this is going to be very important. That sequence is on the mark. Sometimes it doesn't matter, and sometimes it does, especially if there's going to be a very obvious sequence that needs to be in that absolute order. But regardless, 1, 2, 3, 4 goes down, and 5. You get the idea. Dashed lines means a shape will lie behind the other, just to give you a good visualization. So how we would put this together, let me just grab our shapes, bring them all out here. Super fun. Can you imagine cutting all of these scallops out by hand? Why? Right? I'm like, okay, let them do that so I can just jump into the fun. How you can use the applique pressing mat to pre-assemble that. Let's just pre-assemble maybe our center one, and we'll do it in order this time. Is we can see that the lowest number is 7, and then followed by, 6, 7. We'll put the left leaf, the right leaf, our stem, our scallop behind, and then our heart. And we're going to fuse that all together on our mat before we bring that onto the background. It's a really cool technique so that you're not bringing shapes onto the background one by one. So let's grab our larger leaves here. So 6. And this mat has a tackiness to it. It's incredible. So notice as I move this around, they're not moving. Incredible. Some applique pressing sheets, again, I like to use them, but not necessarily for applique, only because they tend to slide around. Here's my longer stem coming in here. Let's place that there. Scoot that under, and that is just barely tucking under that. This one's just barely tucking under. Now we have our scallop heart. See how you can see through? It's really fun. It place the shapes exactly in that drawn kind of footprint. And now let's just remove that paper. The easiest way is just to crease that back, remove that. Important. You will now need to move this as a unit because you cannot press down on that applique you cannot iron on the wafer. I've admitted this once before, maybe twice before. I did that one time. I was so excited. I'm like, I can't wait to see this fuse together. And I realized that this is not glass. You cannot do that. Hold your iron in place 5-6 seconds. Let it do its thing. And really important, I know you want to grab that off there. I have found that you need to let this cool down. In the meantime, you can maybe be removing maybe the fusible webbing off of some other shapes, getting things ready to go. Let that have a moment to cool down. Sometimes, and you can see this leaf right here, this leaf is barely tucked under the stem. When I do lift this off, there's a chance that that leaf's still going to be sitting on that mat. Not a big deal. When I move that onto the background, that will be, I'll just simply tuck that under. So we're going to put this together. This is a longer video. It's the first video. Subsequent months, I'll be saying, all right, the applique, I'll only be talking about specific elements of applique if there's something quite unique about that that's different than this month. Obviously, the shapes will be completely different. But as far as the technique, it's the same. How I find it best to remove the shape is to simply roll this back, just like this, and be gentle on those more tender spaces that barely have contact. Now look at that. No residue on this mat whatsoever. Now I get to move this onto my applique background as a single unit. Incredible. I'm just going to center this up. Again, I cut my fabric. I can see that short. I think I probably might have even steamed it later, and that was not a good move. But let's put that in position. I'm just going to, just for the time's sake, you get the idea. Let me just iron this down. Make sure that seam is all the way into that stem is all the way into our seam allowance. Again, just let the iron sit there. Let it do its thing. And you can do it like this. You don't need to be laying everything out and trying to move it. You can do one flower at a time and one section at a time. It's a lot more manageable that way. And you have less things potentially shifting. And how amazing is that? That is just adorable. And you're simply going to repeat your steps with your other stems, your leaves, and your hearts, of course, and put that down. What we did for our applique, we'll try to get a close-up of that. We just used our beautiful little 3-piece sulky 50-weight thread set, and we just did some straight stitching. This is not a project that we think is going to be laundered frequently. You could really be doing any stitching that you'd like, but we just did a fun, simple little straight stitch on that. Once those two ends are, of course, appliqued and ready to go, that's when you'll be simply going into the final page of your instructions. And we sewed the two ends. Notice our pressing directions. We're pressing toward our patchwork, which doesn't seem natural, but because of the thickness of the heat and bond, the fusible, we felt like that seam wanted to press toward the center. You could kind of determine you want to press those seams open, whatever that is. At that point, you'll make your final assembly of the two ends with your patchwork. And now the fun part comes on as well. Backing will be included in your kit, as well as your binding will be included. And then you'll just go ahead and quilt that and bind that as you desire. So I know this has been a longer video. I hope you've learned something new, maybe learned some new tools you might be interested in adding to your sewing room. Be sure to subscribe. I am looking forward to bringing you the pint-sized table runner for March, and I'll see you soon on another Shabby video.